How did a picture-perfect American town become the setting for a rash of unsettling childhood cancers? That's the question Erin Moriarty set out to answer.
It's been hard on all of us. It's changed us for a lot of ways. I don't even know how to describe them. It's just one thing after another. Every year or month, there's another kid.
Something very strange seems to be happening in Johnson County, Indiana.
I was 10 when I was diagnosed, and I have thyroid cancer. Leukemia, and I was 11. Cutaneous T-cell lymphoma when I was 8.
Acute lymphastic leukemia, and I was 10 at the time.
A lot of children are getting sick, and it started long before the pandemic.
It's scary. You don't know what the future holds for your child. You don't know if you will outlive your child.
Any of you been to funerals?
Oh yes, we went to 3, an 18-month-old, an 8-year-old, and Caleb, he had just turned 18.
This is where we had 3 brain tumors and 1 leukemia.
Carrie Reinhardt and Stacey Davidson started tracking the cases in 2015. So far, they have found over 70 cases in Johnson County alone, which is above the national average. More striking, many of the children with cancer seem to live in or near the county seat in the town of Franklin, which looks much as it did in 1940, when Life magazine put it on the map with this pictorial ode to small-town life.
This charming, cute, turn-of-the-century town, and it's very cozy and feels homey right off the bat.
Reinhardt came here in 1995 for college and never left. It was the perfect place to raise her 3 children, Emma, Sophie, and Sam.
Do it again.
Emma was an 8th grader at Franklin Middle School. She was a swimmer. She was an avid movie fan, a reader.
But in late 2014, Emma began having headaches and nausea. An eye exam revealed swelling in an optic nerve. Emma had a brain tumor. Unusual in children, isn't it?
Less than 3% of pediatric brain tumors are glioblastomas. It's incredibly rare.
Stacey Davidson didn't live in Franklin, but her 10-year-old stepson, Zane, did. The same year Emma got sick, Zane complained of leg pain and went in for blood tests. Zane was diagnosed with leukemia.
When the doctor came in, Zane's question was, why did I get this? Why me? And the doctor said, just bad luck.
But Davidson and Reinhardt began to wonder, what are the odds of so much bad luck? When parents went in search for a cause, this 15-acre commercial site on the north side of town became an obvious suspect. More than 30 years ago, after chemicals were dumped and leaked here, the EPA did order a cleanup, but something along the way went wrong, terribly wrong.
The EPA dropped the ball. Their job is to protect the common good, the environmental health of the common people.
More than 35 years ago, environmental engineer John Mundell was part of an independent team that discovered contamination in the soil and groundwater on this property with a long history of manufacturing by Bendix before the site was acquired by Amphenol. Most alarming, the presence of 2 chemicals, trichloroethylene, or TCE, and tetrachloroethylene, PCE, both used as degreasers in electronics manufacturing and by dry cleaners, and both known as carcinogens. How bad was the contamination back in 1984?
Very significant levels in the groundwater, enough that we knew from there that some kind of active remediation would be necessary to bring the site back to usable condition.
Even after the EPA required a cleanup, it took more than 10 years for a system called a pump and treat, which cleans contaminated groundwater of toxins, to be installed. The EPA declined an on-camera interview, but in an email stated it took no further action because based on agency standards at the time, contamination levels in groundwater did not present an unacceptable risk.
The groundwater makes a plume and it migrates.
But that decision, says John Mundell, allow dangerous volatile chemicals to move off-site along the sewer lines and into the neighborhood. What makes this also insidious is the fact that when this water containing the chemicals comes down here, how it gets into the home is through vapor. It's not really the water, it's the vapor comes up.
That's correct. It goes unnoticed. And so, and that can happen, and it has happened over decades.
This is where the pump and treat is. This is where I lived.
Many of the sick children, says Carrie Reinhardt, live within a half-mile of the former Amphenol site.
I drove by that pump and treat probably 1,000,000 times in the 20 years I lived in Franklin. No clue what it was. Looks like a little shed. I mean, there's nothing that makes you think, oh, this is a contaminated site. Be careful.
With the numbers of sick children seemingly on the rise, Reinhardt and Davidson became alarmed by a paper trail of documents showing ongoing problems with the cleanup.
I am doing everything in my power to support these agencies.
Early on, they asked for help from Franklin's mayor, the state's environmental agency, and the federal EPA.
We were hopeful that the agencies would take heed and take notice and say, okay, we'll take it from here. Okay, we got this. We're gonna move fast. We're gonna figure it out. And that definitely wasn't the case.
The data that we've collected in all of these different situations demonstrates no specific environmental concern that is widespread over the city of Franklin.
And health officials told the mothers that with so many different types of cancer and no direct link between the contamination and the children's illnesses, Franklin didn't qualify under federal guidelines as an official cancer cluster. That meant no investigation into what was making the kids sick.
No one told me that my kids were being exposed. No one told my neighbors we were being exposed.
So the mothers founded a nonprofit advocacy group, If It Was Your Child, and kept pushing for action.
Collect over here where the signs are waving. We love Franklin!
But the town was divided. Some privately feared that talk of contamination might damage the city's image and its property values.
My own children were told this is something your mom does to get attention.
My husband received a phone call early on. They said, do you know what your wife is doing?
There was a local health official who looked us straight in the eye in an official meeting as we sat there with a hydrogeologist and 2 cancer cluster specialists and said, did you girls go all Erin Brockovich out there?
Okay, it's a mess.
But their efforts did get the attention of environmental activists. And in 2018, the New Jersey nonprofit Edison Wetlands Association hired John Mundell to return to Franklin.
You give me hope.
You know, getting data is what it's all about.
To test homes adjacent to the former Amphenol site, the very site he thought had been cleaned up some 30 years ago.
So we tested 30 homes.
The results of the test Mundell conducted in the summer of 2018 and again in February of 2019 are worrisome.
About 1/3 of the 30 homes had detections of TCE and PCE in them.
Do you think there's reason to be concerned, even if there's no direct scientific link?
Absolutely, because the levels that we are looking at are compared to a level that the EPA says can cause a concern. You would not want people to be exposed for long periods of time to the things that we found.
The EPA has finally orchestrated a new cleanup in Franklin, starting with the sewer system leading away from the contaminated site. In the email to CBS News, officials admit that the off-site levels exceed the current vapor intrusion protective standards. Amphenol has agreed to investigate and pay for any further cleanup. But as for Carrie Reinhardt's daughter, Emma, the tumor in her brain couldn't be treated. What was the prognosis? What did they tell you?
I never asked. I didn't have to. Glios are relentless.
Hi. In December 2014, Indiana's Make-A-Wish Foundation granted Emma's lifelong wish to visit Paris.
There's a great big picture.
There's this great picture of him sitting there eating these crepes, high as a kite on her painkillers probably, and just so happy, just so happy. It was by far the most spectacular way you could. you couldn't dream up a better way to spend the last few days of your kid's life, because it was everything she wanted and more.
3 days after they got home, Emma died. Other Franklin kids were more fortunate.
We have talked about it before, and we just understand what each other's went through.
Stacy Davidson's stepson, Zane, has been cancer-free since 2017.
And you feel great?
Feel great for now.
When you say that, so do you always feel like it's hanging over your head?
I don't feel it is so much, but it's always a thought in my mind.
Athena for 2.5 years, and Carly for almost 9 years. Lena is working towards remission.
My mom and dad, they're always nervous about my sisters, and I'm always nervous for them because if it happened to me, it could happen to anybody.
Carrie Reinhardt and other mothers are now suing Amphenol for dumping dangerous chemicals and failing to warn residents of the danger. The company denies responsibility for causing the children's illnesses.
2 streets over and further.
They are a small band of determined parents, says Stacy Davidson, who may be changing the lives of children beyond the borders of Franklin, Indiana.
You have all these small pockets of cities and counties that are starting to have increase in cancers and increase in other things and pediatric cancer. And that's what's so frustrating, is that Franklin's not rare.